Welcome to another video on organic chemistry. In this video we're going to talk about radical mechanisms. We're going to look at the three distinct phases that a typical radical mechanism has: the initiation phase, propagation phase, and the termination phase. For this example we're going to look at this monobromination reaction here. We're going to use bromine as our bromine source, and we're going to use a radical initiator, in this case AIBN. So let's take a look at that first step, the initiation. So let's take a look at that initiation step. In this case, we're using a radical initiator, so I'm going to show how we can use this radical initiator to get that radical cascade going. And the goal of the initiation step is actually to produce the radicals that we need to use in our propagation step, just to get the reaction going. So here's our structure of AIBN, and what happens when we heat up AIBN, these bonds break apart, and what we form are two resonance stabilized radicals and some nitrogen gas. So the nitrogen gas bubbles away, but now we have a radical that we can use in the second step of our initiation. Some mechanisms only have one initiation step. In this case, we're going to look at two different steps. In our second step, this radical we generated in our first step is going to react with our Br2. And what we generate from there is a brominated byproduct. But we also generate this bromine radical. And it's this bromine radical that we're going to need to use in our propagation steps. So let's take a look at the second phase of our radical mechanism, which is the propagation. Now that we've generated the bromine radical in our propagation step, let's show how we can use this bromine radical to do our radical halogenation. So the first step of our propagation is the hydrogen abstraction from our substrate. So this bromine radical is going to pull off one of the hydrogens on this alkane. This generates some HBr, which is one of the byproducts of this reaction. But it also gives us our alkyl radical. Now the alkyl radical we're going to use in the second step of our propagation phase. And that's going to react with another equivalent of Br2. This is the first productive step in terms of product formation, because now this bromine is going to be added to the alkyl chain to give us some of our product. The other byproduct of this step is a bromine radical. This is really important because this bromine radical is going to be reused in the first step of this cycle. It's important to recognize that the propagation sequence is going to be a complete cycle. In this case, we're pulling the hydrogen off of the alkane to form the alkyl radical. Then we're brominating that alkyl radical to produce some of our product, but we need to reproduce a bromine radical which can complete this cycle. This is going to happen over and over and over again, and this is where we're going to see the bulk of the products formed in our reaction. Now eventually, something's going to happen to shut down this reaction. And that happens in the termination step. So let's take a look at what happens during termination. So in the termination step, there's many different reactions that can happen. And what's happening is different radicals are coming together in solution to kind of terminate the existence of that radical. So one example of a termination sequence could be two bromine radicals coming together. So two bromine radicals can meet in solution. And that just regenerates some of the Br2. Now this could be used, again, to initiate the entire reaction, again, if we needed to. Another reaction that could happen in termination, which is actually a productive one as far as our reaction is concerned, could be an alkyl radical coming together with one of our bromine radicals. Now what we see is we form our products in this case, but it also terminates that radical cascade. There's no more radicals that we generate in the product side of this one. Another termination that we could have is actually a dimerization of two different alkyl radicals. So we could have two of these radicals in solution meet. To give us this dimerized alkyl group. Now we don't list some of these things as products in the reaction because there's a very small amount of these things that are formed. This is just what's happening at the end of the reaction to kind of terminate everything that happens. The second step here, where we have a productive termination, is most oftenly confused with a propagation step. It is making the product, but it doesn't contribute to that cycle that we saw in our propagation sequence. So hopefully this helps you give a kind of a basic understanding of the different phases of a radical mechanism that you can use as you start to look at some other mechanisms in this class.